Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the Daily Hindu News Analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 6 important articles. There are 2 articles relevant for the mains exam and few small articles that are important for the prelims examination. So let's analyze all these topics in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from this initiative, why don't you subscribe to our channel and do press the like button and don't forget to share your comments after the live stream ends. Before we start the discussion, I have a reminder about the Conquer Prelims crash course, which is taking place on the Unacademy app and as well as on our YouTube channel. To help you prepare for the upcoming prelims, we have launched Conquer Prelims, and there are 2 phases in which the crash course is being conducted. Under the static phase of the crash course, we have important sessions going on live every day at 6 p.m. on the Unacademy app, and today Hima Bindu ma'am will be taking the next session for science and technology. And as part of the current affairs crash course, every day at 7:30 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel, we go live to cover the most important current affairs of the last 18 months. So today Mukesh sir will be taking up the 4th session for environment and ecology live at 7:30 right here on our YouTube channel. So do watch these sessions live. The best way to access them is to join our Telegram channel. Scan the QR code or search for Unacademy IAS English, and we will share the links of these sessions before they go live. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this column from page number 6. This article talks about the power of judicial review of the higher courts, particularly the Supreme Court. The writer is focusing on the power of judicial review and how the Supreme Court should exercise the power of judicial review, especially when evaluating certain controversial laws and policies. The writer is talking about certain laws passed by the parliament which might have a malified intention, or which might have a divisive agenda, or which might go against the very spirit of the Indian Constitution. The writer is also referring to various government policies and executive decisions taken in the recent past, which have attracted a lot of controversy on their constitutional validity. So the writer argues that the Supreme Court should be completely unambiguous and it should exercise its power of judicial review immediately whenever such controversial laws or policies come into question, when their constitutional validity is under question. The judicial review has to be exercised immediately by the courts instead of delaying it. And there should be unambiguous approach by the courts to strike down such laws which are ultra vires the Constitution, to declare such laws or policies as null and void, as they could go against the very basic tenets of the Indian Constitution. So that is the core argument that the writer is making. So first, let's understand in what context is the writer making this argument, and then we'll understand judicial review in complete detail, which is a very important topic even for your prelims, and then we will look at the final analysis provided by the writer. The context here is that recently the Ministry of Home Affairs has notified the rules for Citizenship Amendment Act. I'm sure many of you know that the CAA, when it was enacted by the Parliament a few years ago, it triggered a lot of controversy, led to mass protests across the country as well. And after several years, the government has notified the rules under Citizenship Amendment Act, and the rules also have attracted a lot of controversy. The writer is pointing out that the CAA rules are unclear as to what will happen to those applicants who have applied for citizenship. What if their application is rejected by the government? What would be their fate? See, to make more sense of this, you should know the basic objective of the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act. The basic objective of the CAA is to grant citizenship to those religious minorities who would have faced religious persecution in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and in Bangladesh. Essentially, it grants Indian citizenship to non-Muslim minorities, Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Parsis, right? If they are from Bangladesh, Pakistan or Afghanistan, and if they have been subjected to religious persecution, on those grounds, they can seek Indian citizenship, and that is the core objective of the CAA. So to operationalize the CAA, the government has brought out the rules, the specific rules, the process that will be followed. A specific deadline has been set, the documents to be submitted has been specified, the authorities who will decide upon citizenship, the process has been outlined by the Home Ministry recently. But these rules don't specify what will happen to these applicants if their application is rejected. That is, if citizenship is not granted to them. So this essentially raises questions about the rights of the applicants. And also the other concern about the new rules is that would these applicants be sent to detention centers? Since they are foreigners, foreign nationals who have sought asylum, refuge in India, if their application for citizenship is turned down by the government authorities as per the new rules, would the foreign refugees be placed in detention centers? What would be the rights available to them? There is no clarity regarding this. And also the other concern is it in a way enables dual citizenship. So foreign citizens from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, as per the law, if they are granted Indian citizenship as well, there is no obligation on them to give up the foreign citizenship. Now this goes against the very spirit of the Citizenship Act, which is the parent act when it comes to citizenship in the country. Right? In India, we don't have dual citizenship. You can't have Indian citizenship and hold on to foreign citizenship as well. But in the case of the CAA rules, it has not been clearly specified whether the foreign nationals from these three countries who are seeking Indian citizenship, if they are granted Indian citizenship, there is no obligation on them to give up the foreign citizenship. There is no clarity regarding this. So this is a shortcoming under the CAA rules. So based on this, the writer is pointing out that it's very clear that the CAA rules, they are not in line with the constitutional principles and the established procedure established by law. The writer is arguing that there is also an intent. Apparently, this is the writer's allegation that there is a malice intent or a malicious intent which is divisive in nature, that divides the Indian society on religious lines. So based on this, the writer is arguing that the Supreme Court should declare CAA rules and the CAA as unconstitutional by evoking the power of judicial review. So that is the core argument the writer is making here. So let's understand what exactly do you mean by the power of judicial review or the doctrine of judicial review. So if you look at the history of power of judicial review, it goes back to the United States, to the 1800s. In the landmark Marbury versus Madison case in the US Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Marshall was the first to lay down the principle of judicial review. So this would be later adopted in the Indian context as well. Power of judicial review is nothing but the power of the higher courts, constitutional courts like the Supreme Court, to review the laws passed by the legislature, to review the decisions, the policies of the executive, the government, and to check whether they are constitutionally valid. If these statutes or if any of the government actions or policies or rules or regulations, if they are going against the spirit of the Constitution, they can be struck down as ultra vires the Constitution, as against the constitutional spirit. So in India, the power of judicial review has been extremely crucial. It's been an extraordinary power in the hands of the constitutional courts, which has been invoked quite consistently. So this extraordinary power allows the Supreme Court and even the High Court to check the constitutional validity of laws enacted by the legislature, that is by the parliament and the state legislatures, and also review the policy actions, the decisions of the executive, of the government, both at the center and the state. This in a way allows the judiciary to maintain checks and balances in the system, to keep the legislature and the executive under check so that they don't overstep their jurisdiction and step on the rights of the citizens. So in a way, it allows the courts, the constitutional courts, to act as the guardian of your fundamental rights, to protect the fundamental rights of the citizens from being encroached upon by such malicious laws that might be passed by the legislature or by malicious policies of the executive, which might curtail the rights of the citizens. So any such statute or policy which is violative of the constitution can be declared as illegal. It can be declared as invalid, as null and void, and it can be struck down by these constitutional courts as unconstitutional. This is indeed an extraordinary power because the term judicial review itself does not find any reference in the constitution. It's not explicitly mentioned in the Indian constitution. But once a law or a policy is declared as unconstitutional, as null and void, then those laws and policies cannot be enforced by the government. The government cannot, or it can no longer enforce those laws, those policies which have been struck down by the court. Is that clear? So it's not explicitly mentioned in the constitution, but it is indeed an extraordinary power which the constitutional courts have used quite frequently. For example, in the landmark Nandini Sundar case, when the practice of Salva Judum came up, right, in Chhattisgarh, the practice of Salva Judum was very controversial. To fight Naxalism, the state government, the state police was involved in backing a private militia called Salva Judum, where a few tribal members from the Koya tribe were armed by the state, encouraged by the state, incentivized by the state to target Naxals, and a private army, a private militia was raised by the state. So this was seen as blatantly unconstitutional, a policy that was against the rights of the citizens. Because in many instances, the members of Salva Judum had committed gross human right violations by targeting innocents or by taking life, taking matters into their own hands, because they would be rewarded, they would be incentivized by the state. So in the Nandini Sundar case, the Supreme Court struck down Salva Judum as unconstitutional, as the policy was divisive. The policy went against the very spirit of the constitution, and it was affecting the rights of the citizens. Then also in the Shreya Singhal case of 2015, the controversial Section 66A of the IT Act was questioned because Section 66A of the IT Act was blatantly misused by authorities to target dissent, criticism, and the right to free speech and expression. So just for posting, let's say, something on social media, many people got arrested under this controversial provision, and this was seen as violative of Article 19. So in the Shreya Singhal case, the Supreme Court invoked its power of judicial review, struck down the provision itself as unconstitutional. And since then, Section 66A has become inoperative. So this is indeed an extraordinary power which is available to the constitutional courts to maintain those checks and balances in a polity, in a democratic polity. It helps the judiciary to keep the executive and the legislature under check. So this power of judicial review, right, it can apply for legislative action, that is for laws passed by the legislature, both by parliament and state legislatures. It can be invoked for reviewing administrative decisions and actions and policies, the policies of the government, state and central governments, and also to review judicial decisions as well. Previous judgments passed by, let's say, High Court or by a lower bench of the Supreme Court can be reviewed by higher benches and it can be struck down. So the power of judicial review is all encompassing. That's why it's indeed an extraordinary power. And it is seen as part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution, as pointed out by the Supreme Court in the Indira Gandhi Raj Narayan case of 1975. So it's very clearly established that the power of judicial review cannot be taken away by the executive or by the legislature. Tomorrow, let's say if the legislature passes a law stating that these laws are outside the purview of judicial review, then the Supreme Court would interpret that as violative of the spirit of the Constitution, as ultra vires the Constitution, and it will strike down those laws. The Supreme Court has stated that any law, any policy, or any decision of the executive is part of judicial review. The courts can exercise the power of judicial review. Nothing shall be outside the purview of judicial review. Right? So there are a lot of advantages that arise out of this for a democratic polity. It happens to be one of the most critical features in a constitutional setup, because it allows the courts to protect your rights, to act as the guardian or the custodian of your fundamental rights. It allows the courts to maintain a federal balance between the center and the states. Let's say there is a law passed by the parliament which is stepping on the principle of federalism, which is encroaching on the jurisdiction of the states. The Supreme Court can step in, exercise the power of judicial review and strike down such laws, thus maintaining the center-state balance, the federal balance. It can help in protecting the independence of the judiciary itself. Right? Having an independent judiciary is a hallmark of a constitutional democracy. Again, a basic feature of the constitution. So judiciary can protect its own independence by ensuring that legislature or executive can't take any action that can curb the independence of the judiciary. Now, for example, if you remember the establishment of the NJAC with regard to judicial appointments, right? The executive tried to give itself a role in the appointment of judges to the high courts and the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court struck down this constitutional amendment as unconstitutional. Of course, this is a controversial, debatable topic, because while the Supreme Court encourages the executive and legislature to be more transparent and tries to hold them accountable, the judiciary itself doesn't hold itself accountable, and it still follows the opaque system, the collegium system of appointments. So, of course, there has been a lot of criticism against the judiciary as well when it comes to its opaque process of appointing the judges, right? But the point to understand here is that the judiciary felt that this constitutional amendment was a threat to the independence of the judiciary, that executive would play a bigger role in the appointment of judges through the NJAC. So, under the power of judicial review, the courts, they struck down this constitutional amendment as unconstitutional, thus protecting the independence of the judiciary. It also helps in keeping the executive under check, especially if a government is displaying tyrannical tendencies or majoritarian tendencies. Those tendencies can be kept under check, thus protecting minority rights in the country as well. Right? So, there is a lot of significance associated with the power of judicial review. But at the same time, there is a lot of criticism against it as well. Let's look at the other side of the argument, which the writer is not presenting. The writer is only talking about the courts exercising the power of judicial review to keep the executive and parliament under check. But there is a downside to this. There is indeed a drawback as well, because this could easily violate the doctrine of separation of powers. Right? If the judiciary becomes the final interpreter of every policy, every action of the legislature and the executive, then it could lead to several cases and instances of judicial overreach, where the judiciary might step into the domain of the legislature and the executive. So this would be a breach of the doctrine of separation of powers, which is another feature of a basic structure of the Constitution. Right? There have been many concerns, for example, regarding NJAC itself. The way in which Supreme Court struck down the constitutional amendment and restored the collegium system, it raises serious questions about the integrity of the judiciary, the transparency that the judiciary is trying to maintain. Right? In a way, it overstepped into the domain of the legislature and the executive. Right? And thus, it leads to a breakdown of the doctrine of separation of powers, which is also a sacrosanct feature, a basic structure of the Constitution. So while there are concerns regarding the exercise of power of judicial review by the courts, you cannot dismiss the argument that this could be an extraordinary power which could help the judiciary to protect the core essence of the Indian Constitution and keep the executive and the legislature under check. The writer here is referring to some recent controversial laws and policies brought out by the government. For example, demonetization. Right? Demonetization had a widespread impact. The government said it was necessary to clear out black money, to tackle terror financing, money laundering, etc. Right? And the government insisted that it was an essential economic reform that was necessary. But it did cause enormous suffering to the people, especially the weaker sections. And there were petitions filed against it, against the constitutional validity of this policy. But the court delayed the exercise of power of judicial review. It took several months to even accept the petition. It went into the case many months later. And finally, when it passed the ruling, almost, I think, 2-3 years later, by then demonetization already had its huge impact, its negative impact on the weaker sections. the petitioners were calling for a stay order, an injunction to try and prevent its impact immediately on the people. But the courts did not act upon it immediately, right? They did not exercise the power of judicial review unambiguously or immediately. So this delay of several months and years essentially weakens the very essence of the power of judicial review. Same goes with the revocation of special status to Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370. Petitions were filed to the Supreme Court challenging the constitutional validity of these changes, but the Supreme Court took up these cases many months later and finally passed a judgment recently upholding the constitutional validity of these changes. Right? Then if you look at the recent standoff between the Supreme Court and the Government of India with regard to appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners, the Supreme Court tried to introduce more balance into the appointment process by appointing a committee where the Chief Justice of India would also be a member of the committee, along with the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha. So this committee would choose and refer the appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and election commissioners to the President. But this was immediately overturned by the government by enacting a law, right, which has again given primacy to the government itself in the appointment process. The Chief Justice of India has been removed, and the Prime Minister gets to appoint a cabinet minister along with the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. So essentially, the government has taken control back when it comes to appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and election commissioners. So this also has been challenged. This particular amendment which was done, it has been challenged on the grounds that it violates the Constitution. It is against the basic structure of the Constitution, because conducting free and fair elections, right, it is integral to a democratic setup. And if the election commission, right, is largely controlled by the government in a way through the appointment process, and if frequently questions are coming up against the integrity of the election commissioners, it becomes very important to ensure that there is more transparency in the appointment process. And even though the Supreme Court tried to make this more transparent, the government has stepped in, enacted a law, and it has overturned the judgment itself. So the constitutional validity of these changes have been questioned, but the Supreme Court is yet to intervene. It has not exercised its power of judicial review with regard to these amendments. The same goes for Citizenship Amendment Act and the CAA rules. They have been challenged. The Supreme Court is still looking into it. It has not yet passed a final order, but already the CAA rules are being implemented. You might have read recently that the citizenship certificates were recently handed over to the first batch of applicants under the new CAA rules. Even with regard to criminalization of instant triple talaq, the writer argues that these changes, right, they have harmed Muslim women, right, because the Supreme Court had already banned instant triple talaq. But the law which provided for the ban on instant triple talaq has in a way enabled a few Muslim men to bypass the penal provisions. And according to the writer again, Muslim women would suffer because of this, which harms their rights. So there have been cases filed against the law itself, against the statute, questioning the constitutional validity. But the Supreme Court is yet to step in. It is yet to finally pass a judgment by exercising its power of judicial review. So the writer is of the opinion that as the court delays the exercise of power of judicial review, it only emboldens the executive and sometimes even the legislature to bring out such laws and policies which might have a malicious intention, which might be divisive in nature. But see, generally, right, if you look at the global precedent, even if you look at United States, generally the courts do not step in and they do not check the constitutional validity of every single law. Even in the US, it's an established precedent that the US Supreme Court does not interject, or it does not check the constitutional validity of every single statute or every single policy, because that would hamper the functioning of the legislature and the executive. That would be a clear case of judicial overreach. So generally, there is a hesitance on the part of the judiciary, rightfully so, to not step in and interject in each and every case. In India as well, the judiciary has placed a restriction on itself to not check whether a law is malicious in intent. Right? The judiciary has said that is not the job of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should not be having those rights to keep checking whether the laws and policies are with the right intention or with the malicious wrong intention. If the court keeps doing that, that brings a lot of subjectivity, and this could lead to judicial overstepping, and it could clearly harm the jurisdiction of the executive and the legislature. So in general, when it comes to interjection by the courts, there is a restriction that the courts apply on themselves, right? With regard to doctrine of separation of powers, this restriction is actually good. It brings a sense of balance. But however, the writer's argument is when such laws are brought out, which clearly have a divisive agenda, or when such policies are being implemented by the government, which might harm the rights of the citizens, which is very evident. And even then, if the courts don't step in, if they take their own sweet time to exercise the power of judicial review, by then the damage would have already been done. Now, for example, hypothetically imagine if the court, let's say Supreme Court, was to now declare demonetization as unconstitutional, right? It wouldn't have the desired impact because the effect of demonetization is already done. It's something which is irreversible as of now. So the time to interject was when demonetization was announced and when it was being implemented. That is the argument of the writer. In such cases where it appears that the larger rights of the citizens, fundamental rights of the citizens, is being affected through certain laws or through certain policies, or if there appears to be a clear divisive agenda or a malicious intent behind a law or a policy, then the courts have to step in immediately, according to the writer. The courts have to interject, at least bring a stay on the implementation of these laws, these policies, so that the courts can check whether these laws and policies are in line with the Constitution, right? And then allow for their enforcement. So the writer is asking for constitutional courts to be more proactive, to be unambiguous, and immediately utilize the power of judicial review. But however, let me present the other side of the argument. This might be very controversial, it might be unviable as well. If the courts keep interjecting with every law, every policy, right? As I told you, it could bring in a lot of subjectivity from the judges. It could lead to a direct standoff between the judiciary and the executive, judiciary and the legislature, and this could be very unhealthy for a democracy as well. It could cripple lawmaking, it could cripple policy making and policy implementation as well, because the legislature and the government would be more concerned about the court interjecting every now and then, right, which hampers decision making and policy making. So it may not be very ideal, and especially in a state like India, in a diverse polity like India, right, constant interjection by the courts with every law, every policy is not advisable. So you should know the other side of the argument as well, not just what the writer is trying to project. Now let's look at the next article from page number 7. Now this article could be relevant for post-independence history and to polity and economy as well. The article is referring to the general railway strike that happened in 1974, 50 years ago. So this year we are marking the 50th anniversary of this landmark event in post-independent India. It's a very small topic, but very relevant in current times as well. So there might be a possible question related to the railway strike of 1974. It was one of the largest such strikes organized by industrial workers in the country. And it has a lot of significance. It had a lot of consequences as well. And the developments of 1974, they are relevant even today, especially with regard to the rights of industrial workers. So let's understand what led to this strike, what was the impact, and how is it relevant today. So now we are marking the 50th anniversary of the railway workers' strike of 1974. The strike was primarily triggered by the abject conditions under which railway workers were being forced to work for the Indian Railways. As you know, Indian Railways has been one of the world's largest employers. It plays a critical role in connecting the country, right? Connecting the rural parts to the cities, connecting every nook and corner of the nation. In a way, it becomes the backbone of the economy, right? In a way, it literally connects every nook and corner, promoting transportation of goods, people, etc. But Indian Railways back in 1970s was suffering, especially the railway workers, right? They were under immense pressure, immense stress. The working conditions were very poor. Their wages were extremely low. There was no social security. The social security provided to them wasn't enough, wasn't sufficient. Be it their salaries, their pensions, the overall remuneration was seen as unjust, as unjustified. And even the wage hike that was proposed by the Third Pay Commission was a very meager pay hike. So essentially, the railway workers were facing very dire abject conditions. They had a lot of grievances which were not being redressed by the government, by the then Indira Gandhi government. So railway workers, they started organizing themselves to raise their demands, to raise their concerns through worker unions, trade unions. An organic movement began within the railway family, right? And the railway workmen, they started boycotting work. They brought all the railway stations and trains to a halt. It almost entirely crippled the railway network in the country and railway operations in the country. Even the family members of the railway workmen joined the strike. So this was a nationwide strike from North India to South India to the east to the west, across the length and breadth. Indian Railways was brought to a grinding halt through this organized, organic mass protest by the railway workers. Now, the significance of this event lies in the fact that it shows the power of collective bargain. See, it's not that the writer is advocating constant strikes and hartals, right, which might disrupt the economy. But the writer is talking about the power of collective bargain when it comes to industrial workers and why it is important to focus on the rights of workers. Even though India was largely following a socialist model and a mixed economic model, right? Ideally, there should have been more priority paid to the rights of the workers, but that was never done back in the 60s and 70s. As I said, the working conditions, the living conditions, the wage, and the overall social security provided to them was not justified, and this is what led to the grievances. It built up, the frustration kept piling up as the government was not responding. Right? The government was not it was not responsive to the grievances being raised by the railway workers and the representative unions. So when the government was not, negotiating with the workers, it was not addressing the concerns, that is when the pressure blew. That is when this burst out into a large-scale organized movement, which began organically, right from the grassroots. The movement kicked off organically with the involvement of railway workers across the country along with their families. So this general strike, it crippled the entire railway operations in the country, and it did have a huge devastating impact on the economy. But what is significant is that the way in which the Indira Gandhi government responded to these protests, instead of trying to talk and negotiate and try to address some of the genuine grievances that the railway workers had, the government decided to display an authoritarian tendency. The government brought in security forces. Right from the Indian Army to paramilitary forces were brought in to tackle the protesters, to clear the hartals and blockades that the workers had placed at railway stations and on railway tracks. And the security forces were even given charge of operating the trains to keep the railway operations going on so that the economic impact could be minimized. So this was a hard-handed approach which was seen as authoritarian. The writer says probably this was a sign of the authoritarian tendencies that were going to come in the next 1 year. Because you all know what happened by 1975. The Indira Gandhi government would turn more authoritarian and eventually impose an emergency, declare a state of emergency, which would be one of the darkest chapters in India's democracy. So the writer says the significance of the railway workers' strike lies in the fact that the government responded in such a way which clearly displayed its authoritarian tendencies, and it showed that the government didn't really show the concern regarding the genuine demands and grievances that the workers had. The use of force led to serious injuries amongst railway workers. Many protesters were injured. Violence broke out in several parts of the country, and these protests were crushed by the security forces, and in several instances, cases were filed against the protesters as well, especially under national security related laws. For example, the Defense Act, right? The National Security Act. Such laws were pressed in, right? Under national security provisions, many of the protesters and leaders of the workers' union were booked and charged which again showed and highlighted the authoritarian tendency of the government. Right? So this, according to the writer, was a stepping stone towards the eventual imposition of the emergency. It was a sign that the government was turning authoritarian. It was no longer concerned about the rights of the people. Right? It was completely bulldozing the genuine concerns and grievances, ignoring the mass protest, and it was trying to go ahead with what the government felt was right. So this approach, according to the writer, is never conducive in a constitutional or democratic setup. Now, how is it relevant for today's context? The writer says that even today, railway workers are facing many grievances which apparently are not being addressed by the government. From the pay scale to the overall remuneration and social security and even the working conditions, they still remain quite concerning, right? And the railway workers are constantly raising the issues, but the writer is asking whether the government is listening to these grievances, right? So that is what we take away from this historic event, which could be relevant for post-independent history. Just have an idea about the significance, the impact of the General Railway Workers' Strike of 1974. Now let's head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles in today's newspaper. On page number 1, we have an article referring to a Sri Lanka-based terrorist organization which has been of great concern for India. According to the article, the ATS, Anti-Terrorist Squad of Gujarat Police, they have arrested 3 Sri Lankan terrorists belonging to a terrorist outfit called the NTJ, the National Thowheeth Jammat, the NTJ. Now let me explain quickly why NTJ is relevant for India, why this terrorist group from Sri Lanka is a concern for India. According to the article, these members of NTJ from Sri Lanka, they traveled to Chennai. From there, they were traveling to Gujarat. And according to the reports, they were trying to get in touch with their Pakistani handler who was handling these terrorists, planning large-scale terror attacks against India. So while traveling to Gujarat, they were detained by the Gujarat ATS. So that is the report here, right? So what is NTJ? Why is it of concern for India? The National Thowheeth Jammat is a Sri Lanka-based terrorist group. All right? It's of serious concern for India because it is affiliated with ISIS, with Islamic State. The NTJ has aligned itself with the ideology of Islamic State. In 2019, the NTJ carried out one of the deadliest terror attacks in the region, which is the Easter Sunday bombings. On Easter Sunday in 2019, multiple churches were targeted in Sri Lanka. Hundreds of people were killed, and this was one of the largest terrorist strikes that Sri Lanka had ever witnessed. Is that clear? So, these terrorists of NTJ who were part of Easter Sunday bombings, they had an Indian connection. Prior to the Easter Sunday bombings, prior to this terror attack in 2019, some of the top members and leaders of NTJ were traveling to India, particularly in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, which indicated their possible connections in India, the possible support that they might have enjoyed by certain radical extremists in India. Indian intelligence agencies had kept a watch on these terror elements from NTJ. India had even passed on the intelligence to Sri Lanka. India had warned Sri Lanka that a terror attack was imminent. But unfortunately, the Sri Lankan authorities failed to act upon it, which eventually led to the Easter Sunday bombings. So following this deadly attack, India has stepped up its surveillance on this outfit called NTJ based out of Sri Lanka, which is affiliated to Islamic State. Is that clear? So this terrorist outfit, which emerged in Sri Lanka, it is largely an outcome of the communal divide in Sri Lanka, because the radical Sinhala Buddhists have been known to target and discriminate against minorities, not just the Tamil minorities, which is an ethnic issue between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, but also there is a communal issue where radical Sinhala Buddhists have often discriminated, targeted the Muslims in Sri Lanka who are in minority. So this constant communal divide has led to the rise of radicalism in Sri Lanka, and this terror outfit has affiliated itself with ISIS, with Islamic State. Since it has a presence in India, it has connections and some kind of support network in India, the group remains of great concern for India. Indian agencies have detected many attempts by NTJ to plan attacks in India as well. And apparently, some of the NTJ terrorists are in touch with Pakistani handlers, indicating the involvement of Pakistan's ISI. So that is the reason why it becomes relevant for us. In fact, this was one of the incidents which was a motivation for the NIA amendment. The NIA Act was amended in 2019, which gave foreign jurisdiction to the NIA. This was one of the incidents that contributed to this. So NIA until then had only national jurisdiction. Across the country, NIA could investigate any terrorist attack, right? But with the 2019 amendment, NIA has been given foreign jurisdiction where we can approach foreign countries to investigate certain terror attacks which have happened in their countries if it is of concern for India. There was another similar event in Afghanistan as well during this period. In Kabul, ISIS Khorasan, the Islamic State branch in Afghanistan, had carried out an attack against a Gurudwara, right? The target was against the Sikh minorities in Afghanistan. So this was also of concern for India, and India wanted to be a part of the investigation in Afghanistan and also in Sri Lanka. So this led to the NIA amendment, right? The act was amended, and now NIA has foreign jurisdiction as well, right? So it's in this context that NTJ from Sri Lanka becomes a terror group of concern. Next, on page number 10, we have an article related to Parliament security. Parliament security has been in the news because of two to three reasons. One, of course, is the 2001 Parliament attack, the deadly terrorist attack against the Indian Parliament, which is the very temple of Indian democracy, and the recent incidents. One is the inauguration of the new Parliament building, right? Plus the new security breach, the recent security breach that happened, where few protesters, they stormed the Parliament building, they tried to display smoke grenades inside the Parliament, which represented a major breach of security. So given these developments, Parliament security has been in the news. So you should know some basic details about the security forces or agencies involved with securing the Parliament. See, until now, Parliament security was managed by the PSS, the Parliament Security Service. Is that clear? Parliament Security Service is an unarmed unit. They don't carry arms or weapons. This unit had around 600 personnel, and it was responsible for the overall security of the Parliament and also for assisting the MPs in the day-to-day functioning of the Parliament as well. This unit traces its origin to the colonial era, to the British era. In fact, its predecessor organization was set up in the year 1929. Now, this is very significant because this unit was set up as a response to the revolutionary attack that Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt carried out in the Central Legislative Assembly. As part of India's freedom struggle and the revolutionary movement, right, you might have read that Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt, they dropped bombs and pamphlets in the Central Legislative Assembly to draw the attention of the British Empire, the legislators. Right, the intention was never to harm. The intention was never to cause any kind of mass casualties. The attack was designed as a symbolic strike. Right, the bombs and the way the attack was carried out by Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt, it was designed to be a symbolic bombing, right, to draw attention of the colonial rulers with regard to India's demand for independence. So this security incident in 1920s led to the establishment of a security force which was initially called the Watch and Ward Staff. The British colonial government established the Watch and Ward Staff in 1929, and it continued post-independence as well. In fact, even in your state legislative assemblies, there is a Watch and Ward Staff. They perform watch function, which is a security function. They perform the ward function as well. They assist the MPs in some of their day-to-day functioning as well. So Parliament also had a watch and ward staff. But in 2008, it was renamed and restructured as PSS, Parliament Security Service. Is that clear? But the PSS, of course, was never capable of dealing with large-scale security threats, especially the kind of threats which we dealt with in 2001 when the Parliament attack was carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed. So this terrorist attack, where PSS members also sacrificed their lives, led to a security review of the Parliament, and CRPF and Delhi police were given joint responsibility to secure the Parliament. Along with the PSS, a unit of CRPF was designated for Parliament watch, and Delhi police would also provide peripheral security. So this had been the security arrangement as far as the Indian Parliament was concerned. But following the latest security breach which happened few months ago, right, and given that we have shifted to a new Parliament building, right, PSS is being decommissioned most likely. CRPF and Delhi police has been withdrawn, and the security is being handed over to the CISF, the Central Industrial Security Force that specializes in safeguarding strategic installations and industrial buildings, is being handed over the task to secure the Parliament. Right? You might have seen CISF at airports, metro stations. CISF is one of the paramilitary forces. It's one of the central armed police forces under the Ministry of Home Affairs. It is responsible for industrial security, for securing strategic buildings, for protecting critical infrastructure, from power plants to dams to nuclear reactors, etc. Right? So such critical facilities are protected by the CISF, including your airports, metro stations, etc. So CISF has been handed over the responsibility, because CISF does have the specialization. It specializes in such security for large complexes, buildings, etc. Right? It has the required resources, the skills, the manpower as well. So it is seen as a right fit to secure the new Parliament building. But however, there is some concern and opposition and criticism against this. Some MPs are arguing that CISF personnel may never be able to carry out the watch and ward function of PSS. PSS personnel were serving for a long time. They were well versed with all the parliamentary procedures, with the protocols followed in the Parliament. They also knew the MPs, even the former MPs as well. So they would ensure that these MPs and former MPs would have unrestricted access, while ensuring that outsiders were prevented from unauthorized entry. Right? So these functions could get disrupted according to some of the MPs, as CISF may not have the required knowledge, the required skills to interact with MPs, right? To work with former MPs who might be visiting the Parliament. So on these grounds, concerns have been raised, but the MHA feels that CISF is the best force which could be given the responsibility to guard the Indian Parliament. Right? So just one small topic. Since PSS is connected to the Revolutionary Act of Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt, there could be a possible prelims question here. Next, let's look at page number 14. We have an article here related to the allegation of war crimes that's being committed by Israel, and also the allegation against Hamas when it carried out the deadly attack on October 7th last year. Right? These incidents of crimes against humanity and war crimes have been brought into question at the International Criminal Court. And the other day, the ICC prosecutor has pressed for an arrest warrant. The ICC prosecutor has pressed for an arrest warrant to be issued against Israeli leaders and also against the leadership of Hamas. Now, this is a very big development. Ever since the Gaza war began, since October last year, Israel stands accused of committing a genocide. South Africa has already filed a case of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice, which is an ongoing proceeding. Apart from that, at the ICC, at the International Criminal Court, Israeli leaders and officials, they stand accused of committing crimes against humanity, for committing war crimes. Hamas as well is accused of the same, for the brutal terrorist attack it carried out against Israel on October 7th. So based on these allegations and the mounting concerns with regard to the safety of the Palestinian civilian population, the ICC public prosecutor has pressed for an arrest warrant to be issued against the leaders of Israel, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and even Israeli Defense Minister and other top government and military officials. Similarly, the prosecutor has sought arrest warrants against top 3 leaders of Hamas as well. Now, let me explain the significance of this, but first let's understand what is ICC. There could be a prelims question related to the ICC because the topic has been constantly in the news. The ICC is an intergovernmental organization and also an international tribunal which has been set up through the Rome Statute of 1998. It has been established under the Rome Statute of 1998. Is clear? It was established in 2002 following the adoption of the Rome Statute of 1998. It's headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands, which is considered as a judicial capital of the world, as several judicial bodies, tribunals are located here at The Hague in Netherlands. This is where ICJ and even a Permanent Court of Arbitration are headquartered. So that is where the ICC is seated. And almost 123 countries are party to the Rome Statute. They have signed and ratified the Rome Statute. But several countries, almost 40 plus countries, they are not party to the Rome Statute, and this includes India. India and even countries like China, United States, for example. Several major countries, they are not party to the Rome Statute because they are concerned about the jurisdiction of the ICC and the powers of the ICC. Recently, you might remember, ICC has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin based on the allegations that Putin and his top leadership are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. So essentially, if Putin were to travel to any country which is party to the Rome Statute, that country would be obligated to arrest Vladimir Putin, against whom an arrest warrant has been issued by the ICC. That is one reason why Vladimir Putin doesn't attend several international summits, including the G20, right? And other summits that take place. For example, in South Africa, right, during the BRICS summit, Putin skipped the meeting because South Africa, being party to Rome Statute, would be under obligation to arrest Putin if he steps into South African jurisdiction, right? So ICC's arrest warrants, it does have a effect. It does have a serious impact. So right now, ICC public prosecutors are pressing for similar arrest warrants against the Israeli PM, who is responsible for the disproportionate use of force by Israel against Palestinian civilians. The ICC prosecutor has accused that Israel is deliberately starving the civilian population of Gaza Strip. Right? They have brought up evidence as well to show that Israel has deliberately adopted policies to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian population in Gaza. It has deprived them of food, water, and medicines, and it has deliberately targeted civilian areas and civilian population, leading to mass civilian casualties. So all these acts, they qualify to be treated as crimes against humanity and war crimes. War crimes according to the Geneva Convention, right? It could even be labeled as an act of genocide. That is what the ICC deals with. As per the Rome Statute, under 4 categories, government leaders, officials, military officials can be charged and pressed. Charges can be pressed against them on these 4 accounts. Either with regard to genocide in violation of Genocide Convention, or allegations of war crimes as per the Geneva Conventions, crimes against humanity, which includes deliberate targeting of civilian population, starving civilian population, targeting schools, hospitals, etc. Right? Israel has done all of them. Israel has bombed hospitals and schools by alleging that Hamas is using them as a hiding spot. So this constitutes a direct violation of all these international customary principles and laws, right? And Israel stands accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's on these grounds that the ICC prosecutors are pushing for arrest warrants against the Israeli leaders and also against the leaders of Hamas. Now, what is the structure of ICC? Right? Who are the judges? Essentially, there are 18 judges in the ICC. They are elected from amongst the member states. They are not nominated. They are elected from amongst the 123 parties to the Rome Statute. Right? So there is an election which is held periodically, and they get to hold non-renewable 9-year terms. That is the term, the duration. So from one country, there would be one judge only. That's also a criteria. From the same country, there can't be 2 judges. The 18 judges would be from 18 different countries. So they're all elected from amongst the members who are party to the Rome Statute. And also, the Rome Statute says that there should be gender balance, there should be representation for women as well, and there should be geographical representation as per the 5 geographical divisions according to the United Nations. The UN has created different geographies when it comes to these international organizations from where equitable representation is provided based on a geographical quota. So this is followed when it comes to election of judges to the ICC. So there is one president amongst the 18 judges who is elected. The 18 judges will elect one president amongst themselves and two vice presidents to provide leadership to the ICC tribunal. Now, what kind of cases can be brought up and who can file the cases, who can push for the investigation and prosecution? Of course, the member country can refer a case. Any member country which is party to the Rome Statute can refer a case, can refer a situation to be investigated by the ICC. All right. Then UN Security Council. UN Security Council can also refer a matter to the ICC prosecutors for investigation and prosecution. Then ICC prosecutors can suo motu take up cases as well, even in non-member territory. For example, Israel is not a member. Just like India, even Israel is not a member. Israel is not party to Rome Statute. All right. But ICC prosecutors can suo motu initiate their own investigation even in non-member jurisdiction. So in non-member states, if such violations are reported, if war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, crimes of aggression, if they are reported even in non-member territories, still ICC can exercise jurisdiction either if a member state claims that the attacks are targeted by a non-member state against its territory. So one member state which is getting affected by the actions of a non-member state can push for the investigation by ICC. UNSC can give authorization to carry out investigation and prosecute those officials, even if it's a non-member state. And the other option is if the non-member state accepts the jurisdiction on its own, which may not happen, which is very unlikely, right? Why would the country which is being accused accept membership and jurisdiction of ICC? It won't. So this is very unlikely, but it's one of the legal possibilities. But otherwise, UNSC can give authorization, or even another member state which is getting affected by the actions of a non-member can press for the charges and ask ICC to take up the investigation even in non-member territories. So what is the impact of this investigation? If arrest warrants are issued, right, they can't be enforced by ICC. ICC cannot enforce or implement them immediately, right? But if, however, if these officials, if they travel to another country, that to a member country which is party to Rome Statute, those governments would be obligated to arrest those officials, those leaders who have a arrest warrant against them. So it basically restricts their movement. So right now Putin cannot travel to every country, especially to countries which are party to the Rome Statute, because they are obligated under international law to arrest Putin if he steps on their soil. So if arrest warrants are issued against Benjamin Netanyahu and other top Israeli leaders and officials, right, against the leaders of Hamas, they won't be able to freely move around, especially to the countries which are party to the Rome Statute. So that is going to be the likely implication. Now coming to the last article for today, on the supplement page of the Science and Tech section under the Delhi edition, we have an article referring to a unique tree species called the Baobabs. The article is referring to how unique this particular tree is, its unique ecological role, and how it has migrated from Madagascar, which is its origin, to parts of Africa and Australia. A recent study, a genomic study, has established the migratory route through which this tree has traveled. Right? The baobab tree is very unique. You can see how unique the structure is. Right? It grows to a considerable height. It has a very thick, massive trunk, and its foliage, right, is very limited at the top. But it performs a very important role in the native ecosystems where it is found. So it is found in Madagascar, in the small island country of Madagascar in Western Indian Ocean, which is near East Africa. It's also found in few East African countries as well, right? And it's also found in Australia as well. Now the question is, how did the baobab tree travel, or how did it migrate? This had always been a big question for researchers. A recent study has established that most likely the pods containing the seeds, they were transported through an oceanic current, the Indian Ocean gyre. The Indian Ocean gyre or gyre, right? It's a circulatory oceanic current that moves from the western part of Indian Ocean over here. This is Madagascar, right? This current moves from over here towards the east of Australia and it circulates back. It circulates back towards Africa, towards Madagascar. So this oceanic circulation that you find here, the Indian Ocean gyre, which plays a big role in climatological events as well, right, could be responsible for transporting the pods which contain the seeds of the trees from Madagascar towards East Africa and towards Australia. So the Baobab tree is extremely useful. It provides shelter to wildlife. It has edible leaves. It produces a sweet nectar, right? So many animals, birds depend on it for food. It attracts honeybees and other pollinating agents. It provides a shelter to humans as well, right? Plus, it has very strong roots, a very well spread out root network that provides a strength to the soil structure. And researchers believe that it helps in protecting the soil system against soil erosion. It could help in restoring soil nutrients and soil fertility as well, right? So it performs a very important ecological role. It's found in Madagascar, native to Madagascar, but over the years, over millions of years, it has spread to Australia and other parts of East Africa as well. Now, do let me know if this particular tree can be found in India or not. Yes or no? If yes, where can you find this in India? Please let me know that in the comments. So on this note, I would like to conclude the session for today. Please take down these practice questions for your answer writing practice. So try to write an answer based on what we have discussed today. And if possible, please post your answers in the comment section. So that is it for today. I hope you guys have liked the session. I hope you have understood everything. If you did, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.